Good morning. I would like to thank Director Krebs and Acting Deputy Undersecretary Hintz to discuss the fiscal year 2021 budget priorities for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, and the Science and Technology Directorate, S&T. Before I begin, I would like to commend my colleague, Congressman Jim Langevin, for his work on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. The Solarium Commission's final report will be formally released hours from now, and I look forward to working with you and Chairman Thompson to codify important recommendations aimed at empowering CISA and better securing our elections. I understand Director Krebs was very engaged in the Cyberspace Solarium. Toward that end, I will be interested in knowing if the FY 2021 budget request from CISA is sufficient to implement the recommendations aimed at increasing CISA's capacity, and if not, what additional resources will be necessary. At the outset, I want to debunk the myth that the federal agencies can do more with less. I support eliminating waste and increasing efficiency, but the fact is that with more, you can do more. Technology is evolving and creating opportunities for our adversaries to hack critical infrastructure, disrupt our elections, and hold state and local government networks hostage. CISA must be equipped to be an effective federal partner, and S&T must be positioned to develop and identify technology to strengthen our defenses. The President's FY 2021 budget fails to do either of those important components. Last year, committee Democrats led a bipartisan letter to appropriate seeking additional funding for CISA's cybersecurity mission. Together, we succeeded in increasing CISA's cyber budget by $350 million. Accelerating efforts to secure federal networks, and wrapping up CISA's threat analysis and response capabilities for private sector critical infrastructure owners and operators and state and local governments. Despite bipartisan support for increasing CISA's cybersecurity budget, the President's budget cuts it by over $150 million. I don't understand how a cut of that magnitude makes communities trying to defend themselves against ransomware attacks, federal networks, or critical lifeline services from power to communications any more secure. Director Krebs, you know your mission. I want to know what resources you need to do it. I would also like to express my concern about the administration's decision to eliminate the CFATS program. To the best of my knowledge, there's no intelligence that suggests that the security risk to chemical facilities has diminished, and there's no evidence that a voluntary security framework will yield the same security results as a regulatory program. You can be certain that members of this committee will not allow CFATS to expire. I'm also concerned about the administration's continued efforts to cut S&T. Last fall, this committee held a hearing exploring the security threats posed by emerging technologies. Despite ample evidence that U.S. investment in research and development is lacking, this budget cuts research and development for cybersecurity as well as important university programs and centers of excellence. We cannot afford to continue to defer investments in R&D, and I will work hard to restore funding. Before I close, I want to make it clear my expectation that members of this committee will receive accurate, candid intelligence about threats to our elections. Last month, the intelligence community's assessment of whether the Russian government's influence activities were intended to advance the president's re-election appeared to change overnight because the president did not like the intelligence. As members of Congress, we must have the information necessary to understand the threat and ensure you have budget and resources you need to defend against sophisticated cyber threats. With that, I thank the witnesses for being here, and I yield back the balance of my time. I'll now recognize the ranking member of the committee, Mr. Katko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Krebs, for being here. Thank you also for participating yesterday in the election security briefing. It was very helpful and informative, and as always, your input is well received. I want to echo the sentiments of my colleague, the chairman, about the Cyber Solarium and the work that's been done on it. I know you were an integral part of that, and I know Mr. Langevin has been as well, and I look forward to a bipartisan effort implementing as many, if not all of those policies into law and on the Homeland side, and working closely with both sides of the aisle to get that done is, I think, critical. Our nation faces digital and physical threats daily that have the potential to disrupt, damage, and destroy their targets. These threats will only grow in magnitude, frequency, and sophistication in years ahead, as you well know, as cyber adversaries, particularly nation-state actors, seek political, economic, and national security advantages. The federal government works with public and private sector partners to prevent and deter current threats, but also to plan for the future. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency Act, or CISA, was tasked by Congress in 2018 to serve as the nation's risk advisor, providing for the timely sharing of information, analysis, and assessment, and facilitating resilience building and mitigation in the .gov domain, state and local governments, and the private sector across industries. Today, we will take a closer look at CISA's plans and how they intend to carry out and achieve their mission. And I must say, I agree with the chair. Cutting CISA's budget is not a really good idea at all. In fact, the opposite is true. We need to expand your resources so you can better handle the emerging threats. CISA is responsible for securing the civilian federal networks, monitoring emerging threats across sectors 24/7, 365, securing our nation's chemical facilities, advising state and local governments on election security, partnering with the public and private sector to protect soft targets in crowded places, and identifying and addressing risks to our national critical functions. During the past year, CISA completed its transition to a standalone agency subject to DHS oversight. I am very interested in hearing how strengthening CISA's authorities could further clarify civilian cybersecurity risk management authorities and CISA's role as a convener of public-private partnerships. As we've spoken in private in my office and elsewhere, very interested in you telling us what else you need, and you know we will respond if you tell us what you need, and I encourage you not to be shy about it, Mr. Krebs. I look forward to hearing about CISA's plans to continue its progress securing our supply chain and tackling risk to our national critical functions and election infrastructure. Finally, I invite you to share insights on CISA's work with state and local governments to secure the 2020 elections from the hindsight of Super Tuesday and other election primaries. We will also hear from the Directorate of Science and Technology, or S&T, about how they plan to execute their mission in the year ahead. S&T, through partnerships with the federal government, academia, and industry, develops innovative solutions to aid the Department of Homeland Security in achieving its mission more effectively, efficiently, and affordably. I look forward to hearing from both of our witnesses and my colleagues to see how we can work together, and the key word is together, to ensure DHS is capable of protecting our nation from digital and physical threats. This is the inherently bipartisan effort we're all involved in, and we should proceed in that manner. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman from New York yields back. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee to give an opening statement, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this important hearing. I want to thank the witnesses for being here and taking the time to prepare for these hearings. I know it takes a lot of time, and you got other things to do, but we appreciate it. It's very helpful to us. Today's threats can be cyber or physical or man-made or natural. They can emerge from nation states, criminal organizations, or terrorists. Just in the last 2 months, we've dealt with cyber threats from Russia and Iran, ransomware attacks, and disinformation campaigns on social media. And these are the threats we know about. Many more may be lurking on the networks. Unless we do something about it, these threats will only grow. CISA is the agency Congress created to do something about this. CISA's work is critical. That's why I was disappointed to see this year's budget request for the agency. I'm very concerned that any cuts like this would undermine CISA's ability to successfully carry out its mission. But I do take comfort in knowing from my 18 years here that the president only proposes budgets, we write budgets. And I can tell you these cuts are not going to take place. I look forward to hearing from Director Krebs on how he intends to mitigate the growing cybersecurity threats with a smaller budget, if that were to happen. I also look forward to hearing from S&T on the important work it's doing to develop new technologies to defend our homeland. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back and thank you.
The gentleman yields back. Let me welcome our panel of witnesses. First, I'd like to welcome Chris Krebs, the Director of the DHS Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, back to testify before this panel. Director Krebs has been at the helm of DHS's cybersecurity activities since 2017, and he has been an integral player in shaping and developing the department's election security capabilities. Next, we have Mr. Andre Hintz. He is the Acting Deputy Undersecretary for Science and Technology. Deputy Undersecretary Hintz has been with S&T since 2014 and in his current role since 2017. Without objection, the witness's full statements will be inserted into the record. I now ask each witness to summarize his or her statement for 5 minutes, beginning with Dr. Krebs. Director Krebs, I'm sorry. I made you a doctor overnight.
Chairman Richmond, Ranking Member Rogers, Ranking Member Katko, and members of the subcommittee. Happy Cyberspace Solarium Report Rollout Day. Congressman Langevin, thanks for all your efforts there, and thank you for recognizing the significance and importance of CISA in the broader national cybersecurity effort, so thank you for that. And thank you for today's opportunity to address the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's CISA's fiscal year 21 budget. The 21 budget provides meaningful investment in CISA's ability to lead the national effort to safeguard and secure critical infrastructure from cyber and physical threats. To accomplish this mission, we must work with our partners where they are, not where we are. Accordingly, this budget invests in additional field-based personnel that are located outside the DC Beltway, where our partners are found. My statement focuses on each of our priorities: protection of federal networks, election infrastructure security, securing operational technology, supply chain risk management, and soft target security. First, with federal cybersecurity across the federal government, our ability to defend networks has improved. The budget will help CISA establish a cybersecurity shared services offering that will centralize, standardize, and deliver best-in-class cybersecurity capabilities to federal agencies. Through this effort, CISA will develop service standards, evaluate individual offerings, and oversee a marketplace of qualified cybersecurity services for federal customers. We must also invest in our people. CISA is leading a government-wide training program for all federal cybersecurity professionals. This includes a rotational program, training program, and reskilling academy. Training cybersecurity professionals is a crucial part of closing the gap on workforce demands for CISA and across our government. But perhaps the most high-profile threat today is attempts by nation-state actors to interfere in our elections. Over the last several years, as you heard yesterday, we have become close partners with the election community, and we're focusing on broadening the reach and depth of assistance, emphasizing the criticality of election auditability, prioritizing the need to patch vulnerabilities in election systems, and developing locality-specific cybersecurity profiles that officials can use to manage risk. Also, we're focusing on operational technologies or control systems, those components that operate our critical infrastructure. The increasing integration and connectivity of those technologies has vastly increased the potential impact of cyber threats. Included in this year's budget is funding to expand our control system security efforts, including sensing, analytics, and partner training platforms. We're also investing in our efforts to understand and manage supply chain security risks. CISA's Supply Chain Risk Management Task Force has brought together 20 federal agencies and 20 of the largest companies in information and communication sectors to reach consensus on how to best manage risk. We're using this forum to understand what's working and what's not, sharing best practices and crowdsourcing solutions to close out supply chain risk management gaps. And at CISA, we also recognize that far too often our nation is confronted with violent attacks on places such as entertainment venues, places of worship, and schools. Funding in this budget supports CISA's school safety initiatives, including stewardship of the Federal School Safety Clearinghouse, a one-stop shop for local officials to find resources that help provide children with a safe learning environment. Before closing, research and development is critical to CISA's mission. CISA and S&T are committed to effective coordination. We're partnering to advance threat-driven cyber analytics and development of a cyber risk framework. This project is an important first step in the larger plan to enhance analytics in conjunction with big data and machine learning. In closing, I'd like to briefly touch on my keys to success for CISA in 2020. Those keys to success are threefold. First, we must continue focusing on our strengths. Second, we must seek strategic alignment with our interagency partners, not compete with them. And third, we must be a customer-centric organization. So what are our strengths? Convening. Bringing a broad range of partners together to tackle tough challenges, sharing actionable information, and collectively identifying best practices for areas like federal and state and local cybersecurity and soft target security. Who must we align with? Our partners in the intelligence community, in law enforcement, Department of Defense, and elsewhere in the civilian government. This is crucial if we're going to be successful, for instance, in election security as well as control systems. And lastly, if we're not intensely focused on our customers, we are doing it wrong. We must continue to push to support out across this great nation and help infrastructure partners big and small. Ransomware is the perfect example of how we must become a customer-centric organization. So with that, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Thank you for your prior investments in CISA. I look forward to discussing this year's budget, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Director. I now recognize Acting Deputy Undersecretary Hintz to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Richmond, Ranking Member Katko, Ranking Member Rogers, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me here today to testify on the President's budget for fiscal year 2021, which includes a request for $643 million for the Science and Technology Directorate within the Department of Homeland Security. S&T's research developed activities which support a broad range of DHS missions, including domain threat awareness, delivering mitigation strategies, and creating novel technologies and approaches for the components, first responders, and other partners across the Homeland Security enterprise. Our customers put their lives on the line every day to keep our nation safe. Having the correct tools, techniques, and/or technologies can be vital to the operational safety and success. Research and development must enable efficient, effective, and secure operations across all DHS security missions by applying timely scientific, engineering, and innovation solutions. This is how S&T delivers results. Technology innovation cycles are rapidly changing, and the nature of the threats we see are dynamic. It is important to note, however, that S&T represents less than 0.5% of the entire federal R&D budget. Let me repeat that. S&T represents less than 0.5% of the entire federal research and development budget, and we strive every day to get as much value out of those funds as possible. Under my leadership with Mr. Bryant, S&T has strengthened our relationship with our customers by providing impactful solutions to those on the front line. We continue to solidify and strengthen S&T's core capabilities and provide deliberative approaches to program execution that ensures timely delivery and solid returns on investment for our nation's taxpayers. The FY 2021 request includes $5 million for quantum information sciences, including artificial intelligence. S&T is beginning to focus on machine learning with the goal of mitigating risks to potential misuse of artificial intelligence and identifying opportunities and applications for the use of trustworthy artificial intelligence while providing privacy protection and developing new governance and policy frameworks for artificial intelligence and machine learning. The FY21 budget request provides $14.3 million for S&T's probabilistic analysis for national threats, hazards, and risk program known as Panther. Panther aligns S&T's chemical and biological hazard awareness and characterization activities to provide timely, accurate, and defensible decision support tools and knowledge to stakeholders. Working with the Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction Directorate, Panther is leveraging S&T's National Biodefense Analysis and Countermeasures Center to address pertinent scientific questions and DHS operational concerns regarding the surface stability and decontamination of COVID-19. Funding in 21 would allow Panther to develop additional assessment capabilities to address growing infrastructure concerns, such as the bioeconomy, and fill other critical gaps regarding weapons of mass destruction risks to the homeland. The administration is also focusing on targeted violence and terrorism prevention, and S&T's 21 requests include $7 million for research to inform policy, strategy, tactics, techniques, and procedures in this area. S&T is actively working to support technology integration and techniques to reduce the likelihood of mass violence and improve the ability to prevent and respond to a mass violent event. The FY21 budget request supports S&T's Office of University Programs in two vital efforts: our Centers of Excellence and working with minority-serving institutions. Centers of Excellence that receive funding in FY21 will conduct research and development that aligns with the administration's priorities to strengthen border security, cybersecurity, infrastructure protection, and prioritize transnational criminal investigations. Finally, the 21 budget request adds $18.9 million in a procurement, construction, and investment account for S&T to begin to address the decontamination and closure of the Plum Island Animal Disease Center. S&T is committed to our mission to deliver effective, innovative insights, methods, and solutions for critical needs of DHS components, first responders, and our operational partners in the Homeland Security space. Chairman Richmond, Ranking Member Katko, Ranking Member Rogers, and members of the committee, thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today and for your continued support of S&T. I look forward to answering your questions.
I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony. I'll remind each member that he or she will have 5 minutes to question the panel. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Director Krebs, in January 2017, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence issued a report concluding that the Russian government meddled in the 26th presidential election and that Russia's goal was to assist the campaign of now President Trump. Last month, several news outlets reported that President Trump removed the acting Director of National Intelligence, Joseph McGuire, after staff from his office briefed bipartisan members of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence on foreign threats to U.S. elections. Are you familiar with that?
I'm certainly aware of the intelligence community assessment of 17 and recall seeing some of the press reports. Yes, sir.
Initial reports indicated that ODNI staff told members in the briefing that the Russian government was once again attempting to meddle in our elections to benefit President Trump's reelection. This is the same thing that Russia did in 2017 when they interfered in the U.S. election to help President Trump. Wouldn't that be the same assessment?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I'm trying to understand what.
Well, the intelligence is the same intelligence from 2017 that Russia's trying to interfere in the election.
So I certainly can't talk to the intelligence. I would defer to the intelligence community on the specific assessments. We are planning as if the Russians and others are coming back for the 2020 election to, again, attempt to interfere.
And let me just get to my main point on this is that we need to believe in the intelligence that we're getting. And all of the reports indicate that the assessment and intelligence changed once the president didn't like it. We as members of Congress need to know that we're going to get the whole truth and nothing but the truth from our intelligence communities, because we have a responsibility to act whether we like or don't like the information. So the real question to you is, can we believe and trust that the information we're getting from you and you all in the intelligence community is the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Let me shift a little bit to CFATS. And I represent probably the number 1 and number 2 largest petrochemical district in the country. And I am concerned that the proposed budget eliminates the CFATS program. Last year, officials from CISA testified before this committee that CFATS is a vital part of our nation's counterterrorism efforts and very much a pressing need in view of the continuing level of chemical terrorism threats. January 15th, DHS issued an alert warning about heightened threats from Iran, specifically in the chemical sector. So can you share any information you have about what intelligence assessments or security assessments CISA has completed to support the elimination of the CFATS program, and how will eliminating CFATS make my constituents safer?
So thank you for the question. Specific to the January alert related to the heightened tensions of Iran, I don't believe that was associated with any specific intelligence product targeting the chemical sector. That was more, again, back to my opening comment about being a customer-centric organization. That was a request that came in from the chemical sector that said, can you guys pull something together for the sector that will speak specifically to Iran and the things the chemical sector can do to protect the sector. So more broadly on the CFATS issue, I think where we are right now is that over 15 years or so of implementation of the CFATS program, there's no question that we've changed the risk management dynamics across that sector. At the same time, the threat landscape has also shifted. Some of the players that were heavy in the 2005 to 2007 period are not necessarily on the map anymore. In the meantime, other actors have spread up. The economy in and of itself, how it works, supply chain, chemicals and commerce have also shifted. So I think part of what we're looking to accomplish here is if you look back at CFATS in general and the application of the regulatory program to the sector, it really only encompasses about 3,300 facilities. And so if you look back at the FY20 budget, that's about $72 million across 3,300 facilities. What we're looking to accomplish here is, as we've fundamentally changed the way risk is managed in the chemical sector across at least 3,300 facilities, what opportunity do we have to extend that risk management opportunity across the 40,000 facilities of the chemical sector? My sense is that regardless of what happens here, and of course we'll implement whatever Congress passes and the President signs, whether it's a reauthorization of CFATS or a shift to a voluntary program, but the bigger point here is we are looking for this opportunity to more broadly change risk management posture across the chemical sector.
And my last question would be, do you support a temporary extension of CFATS so Congress can determine the appropriate path forward, one? And two, do you maintain a list of unfunded priorities so that if you had money, things that you would do?
Sir, we do have a significant list of PDOs or program opportunities that we would be able to, if funded, we'd be able to execute, of course. On your first question, again, we are in a transition planning process right now with about a little over a month or so out from expiration of the program. So we are focused on transitioning right now. But whatever happens, again, we have the funding for the rest of the year to execute the program if there is a temporary extension put into place.
Thank you. Now you're back. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Katko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Krebs, I want to kind of ask you about the cyber solarium report in general, but really talk about how it may impact the budget if those recommendations get implemented. So I view this solarium report as one of the critical things we can do in Congress this year. And I really believe that the next 9/11 could absolutely positively be, God forbid, a cyber attack that's cataclysmic. And I'm not sure we're ready for it. I think this report recognizes that, and it makes a series of recommendations. I know part of it is on the defense side, and we're more interested in the Homeland side in this committee, obviously. So if you could talk from the Homeland side, what are some of the big things in that report, and how it might impact the budget going forward, so we can plan for it.
So thank you for that. And it's interesting, and I'm sure Congressman Langevin shares this, being so close to the wheel in the development of the report, you see the recommendations, and they just make a lot of sense to us. But it's good that someone that's not developed was not involved in the process also thinks they make sense, and this doesn't just kind of fall flat. So the pickup I've seen today, at least, has been very, very positive, that there's some innovative, bold recommendations in the report. But more importantly, there are recommendations within the report that are practical and imminently implementable. And that's the most important aspect of the report in and of itself, that whatever's in it, that we can actually do it. To your point about that defense-offense divide, that was one of the important policy signals that comes out of the report, to me at least, that this is not just about investing in the Department of Defense and General Nakasoni's teams. It is also about ensuring that CISA and the rest of the civilian cybersecurity space and the private sector have the direction, guidance, and resources they need to be able to implement. Some of the key takeaways that I have the report, I think I'll focus on three. First is that it squarely puts CISA at the central coordination point for civilian cybersecurity defense. And that brings all the federal partners together, but that also importantly brings the private sector as well as state and local partners together. There are going to be some significant implications here. Do we have the facilities that we need to truly set up a collaboration space? We're operating in about 9 different facilities. There
have been a bunch of them, and they do seem to be all over the place.
We have 9 facilities in the National Capital Region that we've been in since 2005, when I was a contractor with the prior organization, one of the first inhabitants of the building, and we need a refresh. And so we're going through that process right now with the St. Elizabeth's program. We just need to make sure that we have the access for our private sector partners to the facility, that we can accommodate regular access from private sector partners and make it an experience that they want to actually participate in. It's a kind of, if you build it, they will come sort of approach. So that aspect we're focused on. There's another piece of it, continuity of the economy, that we're working through right now. And that is kind of, in some part, a manifestation of our national critical functions work that we launched last year. And we're also seeing that play out right now across the COVID response. So we've developed a framework for analyzing broader supply chain impacts of COVID across 4 different elements. The first is there a commodity disruption that would disrupt a business or a function? The second is there a workforce disruption that you may not be able to continue delivering that service or function? And then there are 2 kind of demand side issues. One, you have over demand, and that could be like the N95 mask. You have too much demand, and therefore you have a cratering within the function. And on the flip side of that, you may see in transportation is there's a lack of demand. And so the function then degrades. So those are the sorts of things that we want to push into that continuity of the economy. We have the rubric, but we are, to fully implement that recommendation is going to require significant analytic investments within the agency. And then lastly, workforce. As I mentioned in my opening, to be successful in this space, to be truly a customer-centric organization, I have to have personnel out in the field, not just engineers here in DC, but customer service professionals out where our partners are, and that's going to require significant investment in personnel.
Thank you very much. And it does sound like there's going to be more requests from a financial standpoint from the committee and from other committees to implement these plans, and as we work them out and tease them out and get them into legislative formats, we'll definitely revisit those issues. So thank you very much for that. Mr. Hentz, if you could just describe quickly, what are the key legislative priorities for your organization this year?
Thank you, Chairman. Ranking Member, what we were trying to do right now is prioritize the list of requirements from our operational components. To specifically answer your question, those priorities look like countering unmanned aerial systems, things like 5G and other supply chain risk mitigators, obviously support to border and commerce, as well as our support to emerging biological and chemical risk. So those are our core primary equities that right now that we're trying to focus on.
Thank you very much, and I'm interested in that. I'll yield back, but I just want to note, in Syracuse, New York, they're going to start building a 5G manufacturing facility, the first one in the country that's going to have all American components, which is critical for cybersecurity going forward. We also have one of the largest unmanned aerial system research corridors from Rome Labs to Syracuse, New York. So we're at the tip of the spear with some of your priorities. So I look forward to working with you further on those going forward, and I hope we can continue the lines of communication. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me begin by thanking you and the ranking member for the supportive comments about the Solarium Commission project and the report that we're issuing today, and Mr. Chairman, for your leadership on the issue of cyber, and I look forward to continue to collaborate with you on this important topic. Good morning to Director Krebs and Mr. Bryan. Thank you very much for being here today, Mr. Hentz. I appreciate your being here today. Look forward to hearing what you have to say. Director Krebs, I guess I'd want to begin with you and express my appreciation to you for your participation in the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, your contributions to that effort, and the dialogue that took place, and the ultimate findings. Your contributions were invaluable. Obviously, the report being released today, and I'm very proud of the work that we did to bring together many different stakeholders and coming up with a series of recommendations that you pointed out, I think are imminently doable, and that I hope will advance the ball on cybersecurity. So my first question, the report identifies various ways that CISA should work with sector-specific agencies to improve information sharing and collaboration with private sector entities. So, for example, the report highlights that we need more clarity in statute of what is required of SSAs in order to ensure that you have the information that you need to do your job. So, Director Krebs, do you agree that Congress should work to lay out the responsibilities of SSAs to both their private sector partners and to CISA, and that we should resource them appropriately to perform these functions. Well, I'll stop there, and then I have other questions.
So I think this is where we need to strike the right balance. It certainly makes a whole lot of sense to me that sector-specific agencies, of which I actually own 8 of them, between IT, comms, critical manufacturing, chemical, nuclear, emergency services, that we develop within those sector-specific agencies the specific requirements and attributes of those sectors. We can handle the core cybersecurity, whether it's the business side or the control system side. We can develop that core capability, but what I need is the specifics of the sector to be layered on top of that understanding. And I can't invest in significant treasury or banking finance. So that's absolutely the responsibilities that we would be looking to be clearly articulated.
Can you talk about how CISA plans to work toward implementing the recommendations, if you would?
Well, so right now, now that the report is out, we have that kind of the triage list, working through, of course, some of the templates that the Executive Director Montgomery has pushed out. So we've got those identified and the sorts of resources that we will need, the things we can do now, the things we'll have to do down the road, but also working with the Commission on what will require legislative assistance. And I think there's a significant amount of the recommendations that we can implement right now, but obviously with some of the requirements for whether it's IoT standards or some of the additional requirements on critical infrastructure, that's going to require either congressional action or some sort of regulatory proceeding.
So, like my other colleagues here today, I also want to be on record as saying that I'm very concerned about the cuts to CISA's budget proposed by the administration. Look, the National Risk Management Center in particular is a critical component of the Solarium Commission's recommendations, especially when it comes to syncing up the cyber expertise that CISA has with the sector-specific enterprise and the SSAs. So do you believe that the NRMC will be able to carry out its own mission in addition to the ones recommended by the Solarium report with the requested amount of funding?
So I think the way that I see the budget is the Ranking Member Rogers mentioned, the proposal and the actual budgeting piece. I'm on the formulation and implementation side. The way the 21 budget was developed, given the timing of formulation vice the timing of the 20 appropriations, they were out of step. So the 21 budget request, the president's budget request, was built on the 19 enacted. So if you look at it through that lens, it's actually an increase over the 19 enacted. Because we didn't receive the FY20 appropriations till late December, by that time the 21 president's budget was already baked from where I sit at least, and so it was out of my control. That was already cooked. There was not time to kind of repeg it against the 20 approps. So what you see instead in the president's budget request are the key areas of focus for the agency, and there is plenty of room for investment. The National Risk Management Center, for instance, has plenty of room for investment to get the additional analytic capabilities we would need if that's what the Congress decides.
Clearly, CISA is going to need additional resources to do the job that we are expecting you to do. I appreciate the job that you are doing as director and your team at CISA. Thank you for that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman from Rhode Island yields back. I now recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Rogers, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Krebs, it's been reported that there are over 300,000 cybersecurity job vacancies in the country at present. So we have a real challenge, and that's across, the private and public sectors. How many job vacancies do you have that you're struggling to fill?
At the moment, we've got about 655 vacancies within the agency. About 151 of those are cybersecurity. I have about a 95% retention rate on the cybersecurity side, which is good, and it's improving. What we are doing right now, particularly as we continue to hire against the FY20 funding, and that set, again, pegged the FTE rate higher, We're trying to look at hiring as from a systematic approach. So left to right, from identifying the job to actually getting a person in a seat with a PIV card and a machine ready to roll. And that requires a whole host of partners within CISA and without. And so really trying to flesh out who owns these things, what are the bottlenecks, and then what's the plan we're putting against it. So a couple examples of choke points or bottlenecks that we're seeing. It's the hiring manager develops a position description. The problem with the hiring manager doing that is a hiring manager is a collateral job. It's in other duties as assigned. So I have somebody who is a program manager and an engineer, but also has to do a hiring manager job. So we're saying, okay, maybe we relieve them of the hiring manager responsibility and have full-time hiring managers that their job, at least on a 6-month, maybe cyclical basis, would be to just work position descriptions, just work the interview process. We think that can streamline and make a more efficient process. We also have to look at—
Have you started that?
Yes, sir, we did. A couple weeks ago, we launched a task force focused just on this sort of thing.
I'm sorry
And
for the
so
interruption.
we're going to be plowing through those PDs and the selections, which then gets us to the subsequent pieces, security. For instance, in the past, we've looked at cybersecurity jobs as requiring top secret SCI clearances. We're challenging those assumptions, saying, well, you know what, I might not need out in the field anybody that has a TS. Secret might be fine. So let's take a stab at that. And if they need TS down the road, then we can put them in for that process. The TS the top secret clearance is a significant additional time lag in hiring. So we're going to change the way we write PDs. Plus there are other policy and process issues. Again, some of that security clearance review I have to outsource to other parts of the department. So let's see what we can do there. But also just getting smarter about how we write position descriptions. So working in part with the Aspen group and their cybersecurity working group, they issued a series of recommendations on how to improve cybersecurity hiring. One of them that we've adopted is don't over-spec the position description. So you're trying to hire someone into a job, don't say you got to be able to do 15 things. Mm-hmm. Just tell them the 2 or 3 things you need them to do. So those are the sorts of things. We're just trying to bring a little bit of reality into the hiring process. And we've already seen a 12% decrease in our time to hire. So in some cases, that's only, that goes from like 260 days to maybe 240 days. Just trying to improve these numbers a little bit and incrementally do it. But we think we've got processes in place where we'll be able to dramatically cut the hiring process.
Do you feel, or have you found that your salary and benefit package is adequate to compete for talent?
So thank you for bringing that up because I neglected to mention it. We have been provided a series of different retention and hiring incentives that we can use, including tuition reimbursement, up to 25% hiring, or rather retention bonus. And so I can actually, I think, generally compete in the market. Certainly not on the top end, but we can provide between mission and pay and just quality of life. We think we can do a pretty good job here. So it's just about getting out there and making sure we're using smarter, platforms, really hitting some of the online, like LinkedIn and things like that, aggressively recruiting across those platforms.
Have you found that you've been able to bring in many CISA employees through the Scholarship for Service program?
We have used that, and that is one of the key partners that we bring. We bring folks in, particularly at the kind of the lower and mid level of the GS structure, not at the higher GS 15. But we need to take greater advantage of that. That's the way I see it. For us, it's somebody's doing recruiting for us, and we just got to go kind of collect resumes, and we can make on the spot at the SFS hiring fairs. We can make on the spot offers and immediately get the process started, and that shaves 2 weeks off.
I would love to take the lead on helping you with that particular issue. I think the Scholarship for Service program is a very underused tool, so if you'll get with me and let me know whatever you need, I'll take the ball and run with that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Gentleman from Alabama yields back. I now recognize the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Rice, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Director Krebs, as you responded as you said in response to a question by Mr. Langevin, it's clear that it's going to be up to Congress to translate many of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission's recommendations into legislation or legislative proposals. But I think it's worth noting that the FY 2021 budget request would not advance the solarium's vision for CISA, which I think is problematic, to say the least. But my question is how do you plan to invest in 5G security and resilience, supply chain security, and election security with less money?
So if you look at the past 3 years, we started from scratch. I'll use election security as an example. We started from scratch. We had zero election-specific money. Over the past 3 years, Congress has invested about $102 million in our election security effort. Last year was about $43 million. The FY20 budget, 21 budget has, I think it's about 30.5 pegged against election security. What we're using those funds to do is, yes, provide specific election capabilities, but also invest in broader capacity and capabilities within the agency on vulnerability management, threat hunting, any of those sorts of vulnerability scanning capabilities, remote penetration testing. So we'll continue to do that. And the more we put in there, it will directly benefit elections, but also the broader critical infrastructure community. But again, with more, I can always do more. So again, whatever you will, of course, appropriate, we'll be able to implement and execute against.
So I think one of the problems with the election interference is putting aside what the intent is, putting aside what countries like Russia and China, what specific candidate they are trying to help. Put that determination aside. When you look at just the overwhelming amount of disinformation that is out there, how do you address that issue? So if a specific campaign sees this just repeated disinformation that obviously we'll just assume is negative against one particular person, what do you suggest a campaign, and whether it's a Republican or a Democratic campaign, because disinformation is at the heart of what's happening here, and the attempts to sway the opinions of everyday Americans. So how would you suggest that people in campaigns handle that?
So stepping back a little bit in the broader disinformation issue and countering disinformation, we tend to view it as a supply and demand problem. On the supply side, you have these the influence operators, whether it's Russia, Iran, China, whomever it is, doesn't matter, pushing bad information, right? And so there are capabilities across the intelligence community, the law enforcement community, within the private sector, on the social media platforms that can disrupt that supply, but do it in a content-neutral way that's more about tagging actors, sharing those, illuminating campaigns. I got to give a lot of credit to the social media organizations for, compared to 16, we're light years ahead of where we were. Is there room to improve? Absolutely. There's more that can be done, particularly with encouragement, I think, from the Congress. But there's another side to all of this. And so it's specific to your question, if you see it, report it, send it into the FBI, send it to the social media platforms. They have dedicated teams that are monitoring, but also have intake mechanisms so that they can identify and then take down these campaigns. But the more important aspect of this, this is a whack-a-mole game. If we are always chasing the latest the disinfo campaign, what we've got to do is focus also on the demand side. And the demand side is the American people. So how do we create a more discerning public, a more informed, educated public on the things that are happening across the news and the media and the social media platforms they see? So that's what we've put a lot of effort into, and that, I think probably the most well-known thing we've done there is the War on Pineapple, which was last year. We launched a program that distilled down how disinformation operations work, how the Russians do it. But we did it not in a way that it's Russia, it's whether you like pineapple on your pizza or not. So it's a very kind of non-confrontational issue, but it's educational. We got secretaries of state, election directors involved, pitted on either side. Even I think the Armed Forces of Canada got involved in the whole thing. So we had a foreign influence operator in here, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, it was educational. It actually took off. People started to get it. So there's a civic education opportunity in front of us, and those are the things we're looking to do with the social media platforms, as well as academia and some of the other nonprofits that are involved here.
I'd like to follow up with you on that. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
The gentlelady from New York yields back, and I recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker, for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cree, let's see, reflection, Mr. Hintz, is that correct? So, yeah. Since the military doctrines of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran include EMPs, electromagnetic pulse attacks, with their cyber strategies, and that our civilian infrastructure is highly vulnerable to EMPs, how is DHS addressing the existential threat of an EMP attack so that Americans can be assured they are safe?
Thank you for the question. So what we've done specifically is formed a very tight relationship with CISA, who from the department owns the mission space per the 18 NDAA, I believe it was, to ensure that there's a cooperative public-private partnership between their organization and critical infrastructure owner-operators. What we've done specifically is a T&E assessment to help with a better understanding of how one might go about shielding their critical infrastructure, how to better obfuscate critical elements that might be subject to EMP, GMD, and other types of solutions, and then working with CISA, propagate that information throughout the mission spaces through which they operate to ensure that everyone has good hygiene practices. But at the end of the day, what we're really driven by is a demand signal from CISA and its mission partners in the field to help inform what our R&D should be.
Thank you for that answer. Director Krebs, CISA has started their team closely monitoring the coronavirus and is working with critical infrastructure partners to prepare for possible disruptions that they may stem from widespread illnesses. How is the agency ensuring that disruptions are minimized to critical infrastructure sectors, such as the emergency services sector or the nuclear reactors, materials and waste sector, both of which DHS is designated as the sector-specific agency in the event of a large outbreak? Can you address some of that?
Yes, sir. So we established within CISA about, it was in early February, we stood up an enhanced coordination cell and designated a mission manager. So that really is the nexus of all COVID-related activity within the agency. And under that, we've got a series of lines of effort. The first line of effort is physical protective measures and recommendations that typically take CDC guidance and then apply sector-specific guidance on top. Okay. And that looks at different business models. If you're heavy into public engagement, like a hotel or a sporting venue, here are the things that you should be doing. But it also looks at industrial environments, including pipelines, chemical, electricity. We also have a line of effort focused on cybersecurity. So as organizations move to telework, what are the cybersecurity considerations? Because the attack profile changes. You might be using more VPNs, so make sure you've got your Citrix and other VPNs patched, things like that. But also targeting and looking into the phishing campaigns that we've already seen the bad actors using as an incentive or enticement to get people to click on links. We're also looking at these continuity of the economy aspects. As I already talked about, those 4 elements of how a function may be degraded. And then looking deeply at disinformation as well. So working with our intelligence community partners of how is disinfo playing out across COVID, and this is important in the election space particularly, we had a call last week with about 600 state and local election officials about, what are the hygiene practices they can take, but also what are we seeing in the disinfo space and how can we dispel any sort of coronavirus or COVID impacts on voter turnout, for instance. And you're already starting to see some of those discussions take place into action. Earlier this week, Secretary Frank LaRose from Ohio announced that any voting precincts in nursing homes or assisted living communities will be moved out, and they will not be taking place. So we think that's a great outcome that we want to continue pushing that information around.
Very thorough answer. My follow-up, would a decrease in funding for fiscal year 21 threaten the functionality or security of any of these components that you mentioned if an outbreak were to occur?
So I think based on the 20 budget, we've been able to build capacity. The 21 budget will allow us to continue that activities. I think what you'd see is enhancements wouldn't be able to happen necessarily. And that is one thing that we are looking at right now on COVID. with the National Risk Management Center in particular. What additional analytic capability do we need to bring in right now to do prospective analysis? And that, of course, is going to continue likely past the fiscal year break.
So security not necessarily compromised, but enhancements moving forward would be inhibited. Is that
I think steady state. It's we can maintain what we have, but we see the threat landscape shifting, and so the ability to further invest in capabilities, I think, would benefit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from North Carolina yields back. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Locken, for 5 minutes.
Great. Thanks to both of you for being here. Mr. Hentz, I'm interested in this idea of how the Department of Homeland Security can move new ideas, particularly on the issue of border security, new technology that might help us secure our borders more efficiently. How do you take that right now from pilot project to actual scaled use? It's a problem we have in the Defense Department. I'm on the Armed Services Committee, and I have a bill that is trying to bridge this gap. But can you explain to us and potentially explain some of the gaps we have in going from great idea that maybe the private sector has to a scalable, usable piece of technology?
Sure. So thank you for the question. And the first thing that we try to do is get a really refined understanding of what the operational gap is from that component. So in this case, let's say we're working with CBP. We establish them as a board of director type member for our innovation approach. And what we've done is we've stood up capabilities such as the Silicon Valley Innovation Program. It's more so about the idea of finding unique innovation in industry, and we pair those innovators, those non-traditional performers, with those operators. Once they completely understand the use case, what we do is almost like a Shark Tank type of approach to determining whether or not their solution is actually, one, usable and effective in an operational environment, and then two, does it then scale? Now, where the deficiency is that I think you're going for is that we as an S&T organization, we don't have acquisition authority. And so while we may go off and find these unique in-state types of solutions that are coming out of the emerging market, it's still incumbent upon the operator like a CBP or CISA to program for those acquisitions. Because we don't have that authority, we don't then, by definition, go off and buy that solution for that operational component. So I think that is one of the main deterrences for quick adaptation. The other is more predictability around other transactions authorities. By us using other transactions authorities or the operators using 880 authority, that would also give the department a head start, a jump, if you will, where it's not a big traditional acquisition.
Yeah, so I'm working on a bill with some of my colleagues across the aisle called the Intel at Our Borders Act, which basically requires the department to provide a comprehensive strategy on how to integrate some of these new emerging technologies. It's actually something CBP, our local folks in Michigan, from Michigan, so the northern border, have been super excited about. They've helped us draft the bill, so more to follow, but we'd love any notes for the record on what would be helpful for you to actually make this more effective. Director Krebs, I just want to thank you for your approach to this committee. I know it's a strange thing for both of you to be up here sort of defending your budget, which cuts your budget, but knowing that we will put money back in your budget. That is a complicated thing to do, and I want to thank you for having your, I think he's your Assistant Director for Cybersecurity, Brian Ware, came up and did a briefing, sort of a get-to-know-you thing, and that stuff makes such a difference when you're talking to a committee that is looking to help your department, so thank you for doing that. Can you tell me, I constantly do these events with my local governments who feel pretty wholly unprepared to manage cybersecurity on their own. Some of them are working part-time, this is not their primary job, they're trying to do their best. And I know that we have put in, again, like this committee has been great about talking about building up resources for our local officials to provide for themselves. But in your perfect world, it seems like we can't keep doing this where we're expecting really small communities to defend themselves and they hold the private data of our residents. So what has to happen? Where are we going? Help us forecast how we're going to better protect ourselves since our local communities are on the front lines.
So it's going to require, and yeah, I think about this almost nonstop, and nowhere is this more acute than in election security, of course, with 8,800 jurisdictions across the country that are managing, in a lot of cases, significantly outdated systems, and they're just operating from a lack of funding. So I think there are a couple challenges here. First is just the governance aspects. When you have just this diversity of ways that states manage or able to manage based on home rule or otherwise, requirements across distributed counties and jurisdictions. There's also a funding issue, of course. The states just have significantly different funding profiles than the federal government that can run a deficit. And then just the availability to services. There's not a lot of acquisition leverage or procurement leverage when you're talking about a local jurisdiction. So at the governance piece, we're continuing to just raise awareness with state governments, with state legislatures. You know, my theory is that awareness leads to investment, which builds capabilities, and we're going to have to continue beating the drum on cybersecurity awareness. And that is, I know, sometimes a shocking thing to hear, that people still need to be made aware of cyber risk, but it remains the case. We need the leadership to understand this. The second thing on the funding, understanding that there are a couple different bills floating around on providing grants to state and locals. I think those are certainly useful things we need to work through, and we need to get to a spot where, like FEMA has the Disaster Relief Fund, you know, what does a cyber equivalent look like? But at the same time, we're not sitting back and waiting. We, in the recent FEMA Homeland Security Grant Program, which I'm sure you all heard from your chiefs of police and emergency management, we did put some requirements in there for cybersecurity and election security investments, which over the last 7, 8, probably 10 years has been a national preparedness report, key area of lack of preparation. And then lastly, what more can I do in the federal government space to provide additional services out to federal partners? So the continuous diagnostics and mitigation platform, for instance, is something that we can open up. It's on the GSA schedule. We can do that. Some states don't have the ability to buy from GSA, so we need to change that behavior, but also make things affordable. The .gov Act, which allows for the actual .gov domains to open up, there's a $400 requirement. $400 in local jurisdictions in Michigan or elsewhere, that's a difference maker. That can be, you know, somebody's bonus. So these are the things we need to work through. And then lastly, we're working through standing up a protective DNS service for the federal government. How do we open that recursive protective DNS program or platform for state and locals as well? I see centralization and opening up services like that is the key to changing risk outcomes for state and local partners.
The time of the gentlelady from Michigan has expired. I now recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Underwood, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Several weeks ago, a school district that serves my community in Crystal Lake, Illinois, was hit with a ransomware attack. The school officials did pretty much everything right. They took the servers offline, they protected sensitive data, they avoided major disruptions in student learning, they planned ahead, they even had a cyber insurance policy. But it still took over a month to get the student computers back online, and the attack cost over $800,000, not all of which is covered by even good insurance. The fact is that ransomware attacks are business, and that business is good. While both CISA and Congress have made important steps, they aren't enough for schools like those in Crystal Lake. So, Director Krebs, can you tell us more about the profile of these kinds of attackers? And are they nation-state actors or affiliates, organized cyber criminals, lone actors? Can you just say something about the rest?
Yes, ma'am. And I'm smiling because your ransomware is business and business is good line. I've used that before, and it's absolutely what's going on.
Yes, sir.
So the way we look at ransomware right now is there are kind of 3 things that are going to have to change. First is we have to continue investing in the defensive side. Yes, they did all the right things, but I'm sure that when you go and do the postmortem, there were elements that could have been implemented to protect. You know, really what we're finding is just some simple measures like multi-factor authentication, appropriate Windows administration, least privilege, things like that can just stop it from happening, and they'll go to the next partner, the target. The second thing we have to do is disrupt the economic model, disrupt the business model.
Right.
like you said, business is good. That's why it continues. So how do we disrupt that? Are there things we can do, the Congress can do, to target the ransomware actors, to take a look at actually paying out ransomware, whether that's a public policy issue or not? I think that's a good question that we need to take a hard look at. And then the third thing we have to do is, what more can the federal government do, not just from a defensive side, but from more of an aggressive, almost defend forward perspective, do to disrupt these behaviors? You know, we know where these guys operate. They're not in the United States, they're in Russia and elsewhere. What can we do to put additional pressure on them from the intelligence community, from the Department of Defense?
But would you characterize the actors, how would you characterize the attackers themselves?
The actors themselves are criminals.
Okay.
They're straight up criminals, not necessarily, in this case, like I mentioned Russia, so it's not like they're necessarily FSB, but they're cyber criminals operating in the sovereign space of some of our adversaries in some cases.
So I thank you for outlining those next steps that we can all take to protect our communities and critical assets that we all have within our own organizations from ransomware attacks. I do think that there's more room for leadership from CISA and from law enforcement here. My constituents weren't sure, for example, whether to leave the evidence of the attack intact or to try to get the operation up and running quickly to serve their students. And so if you can just offer, advice for what to do for communities that are experiencing this type of attack.
So we have issued a significant amount of guidance and best practices, not complicated 80-page guidance stuff, but one-page, two-page sort of guidance for our partners. One thing that I don't think we've explored quite enough is working with you and Congress, understanding the influence you have back home with your partners in the school districts and the public health community. Please encourage them to work with us. There are things that we can do to help them to make sure that they don't have that bad day. $800,000 to a small community in your jurisdiction.
It's significant.
It is. That can be backbreaking.
So then do you think that there are technical standards that hardware and software products should meet in order to limit their vulnerability to ransomware attacks?
Again, a lot of this ransomware is just a matter of somebody clicking on a link. It is often delivered by spear phishing. In some cases, it's delivered by a remote desktop protocol, ports being open, things like that. So this is not necessarily a hard sec or software sec issue. It is configuration. It's Windows administration, Windows administration, Windows administration.
Right.
Those are the sorts of things that we need to invest in. And it's just awareness and how can we just configure from the get-go better postures.
Okay, so Mr. Cuccinelli, your colleague, is going to be coming to testify before the larger committee this afternoon. And he has said that CISA has been assessing, quote, issues of concern and, quote, potential impacts to infrastructure from coronavirus in the event of significant community spread in the United States. Those are clips of his quotes. Significant community spread is already happening. So Director Krebs, can you just talk about what impacts to critical infrastructure that you're seeing and what should our states and localities expect to come in the weeks and months?
Yes, ma'am. So we're trying to break it out from the tactical today and the PPE or the personal protective equipment that's out there into the more strategic, longer-term analysis. And I talked about it a little bit earlier, but through our National Risk Management Center and the National Critical Functions approach, what we're trying to do is understand what those key elements of degradation might be. We've identified 4 key aspects. First is disruption of a commodity, of a key commodity, like a widget that would go into a car, some sort of device that would go into a car that would prevent it from rolling off the line, for instance. The second is workforce disruption, so whether it's absenteeism, sick outs, or other sorts of issues, particularly across different business models. The third and fourth are more about the demand, so in some cases, like N95 masks, you would have an increase of demand where you can't meet it.
Right.
And the fourth element is a cratering of demand, and that could be, in some cases, transportation. So try to pull those all together. We are seeing automotive, we're seeing IT and comms disruptions, and then also soft goods.
Well, as you are publishing documents to the communities about those, can you keep our committee informed? We appreciate it. Thank you, and I yield back.
The time of the gentlelady has expired. I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objection, the committee record shall be kept open for 10 days. Hearing no further business, the committee is adjourned.